Today, we're diving into an analysis called The Unraveling of the Republic. It paints a pretty startling picture of what the United States could look like just a couple of years from now, in 2026. So let's break down exactly what it says. Okay, so the story kicks off on the freezing cold streets of Minneapolis in January of 2026. The whole city is on edge, it's filled with federal agents. And then a 37-year-old ICU nurse, a guy named Alex Pretti, is shot and killed by these agents while he was just filming them on his phone. Now, according to this analysis, his death, well, it's more than just a tragedy. It's a signal that something really fundamental in the country has shifted. And that leads us to the big question, right? How on earth could something like this happen in a major American city? The analysis we're looking at argues that what went down in Minneapolis wasn't some random accident. Nope. It was the direct result of a series of deliberate changes made to the very machinery of the U.S. government. The first piece of this puzzle is something the source calls a silent coup. Now, we're not talking about tanks rolling down the streets. This is about a quiet, almost invisible, bureaucratic effort to completely rebuild the government from the inside out. And the key to this whole thing, it's an executive order called Schedule F. It sounds kind of boring and technical, but its effect is huge. What it does is reclassify tens of thousands of federal employees, and in doing so, it strips them of their job protections. Just like that, they become at-will employees, meaning they can be fired for any reason, or for no reason at all. So here's a look at the before and after. For more than 100 years, the U.S. civil service was built on merit. You got hired because you were an expert, maybe in public health or national security, and you were protected from being fired just because a new political party took over. But under Schedule F, that whole model gets flipped. It becomes a system based on personal loyalty. Your expertise doesn't matter nearly as much as your allegiance to the president's agenda. And the sheer scale of this change is just staggering. The source estimates that by early 2026, we're talking about 300,000 federal workers who are just gone. These are the people with decades of institutional memory, and they've either been laid off, forced to retire, or they've just resigned. The document doesn't describe this as just trimming the budget. It calls it a systemic purge. So what does this actually look like in the real world? Well, the impact on public safety is immediate and direct. Take the worker safety agency NIOSH. It loses 2/3 of its staff. And you know what that means? They have to stop certifying the safety gear that firefighters rely on. The Department of Justice loses over 200 experienced lawyers and agents, which stalls critical counterterrorism investigations. And there's even talk of privatizing the National Weather Service, which could mean you'd literally have to pay for a life-saving tornado alert. Okay, I know what you might be thinking. This all feels a little abstract, right? A bunch of bureaucratic shuffling in Washington, D.C. So here's the crucial link. How does firing a bunch of government workers lead to actual violence on the streets of a city like Minneapolis? Well, that brings us to the second and much more visible piece of this story, the deployment of federal law enforcement into American cities under a brand new and very controversial program. It's called Operation Metro Surge, and the document details how over 2,000 federal agents, mostly from agencies you associate with the border, like CBP and ICE, were sent deep into the country's interior. They were deployed to Minneapolis, a city hundreds and hundreds of miles from any international border. And once they're on the ground, the situation deteriorates with terrifying speed. In just a matter of weeks, 2 citizens are killed in separate encounters with these federal agents. First, a 37-year-old mother named Renee Good, and then the nurse we started with, Alex Pretti. The response from the governor, the attorney general, and the mayor is immediate. They sue the federal government, claiming this is a massive, unconstitutional overreach of power. This conflict sparks what the document describes as a full-blown constitutional crisis. I mean, you have state officials suing the federal government, citing the 10th Amendment, states' rights. But in response, the now politicized Department of Justice doesn't back down. It launches its own investigation into the state officials for interfering. And hanging over this whole explosive situation is the threat of invoking the Insurrection Act, which could allow for the deployment of the U.S. military on American soil against American citizens. Now, while all of this is unfolding, there's a third front to this story. And this is one that affects every single person's finances. The source calls this your wallet as a weapon, and it details the economic policies being rolled out. And the centerpiece of this economic plan is a universal 10% tariff on pretty much all imported goods. The source breaks down how this works very clearly. You see, a tariff is just a tax, But it's not paid by a foreign country. It's paid by the American company that's importing the product. And that company, if it wants to stay in business, has basically no choice but to pass that new cost on to you, the customer. To make this super tangible, just think about your morning coffee. That $12 bag of beans you used to buy might suddenly cost you $14.50 at the checkout. According to this analysis, that's not just some random price hike, it's the direct result of adding that 10% tax at the border. And that same math applies to almost everything you buy, from your phone to your car. So when you zoom out, the larger economic picture described here is pretty troubling. Inflation is really hitting hard, especially on big-ticket items. The housing market is basically frozen. Why? Because tariffs are making building materials way more expensive. And at the same time, mass deportations have created a massive shortage of construction workers. And to top it all off, the president is publicly attacking the independence of the Federal Reserve, the one institution that's supposed to act as a non-political backstop for our entire financial system. So you put all these pieces together, the bureaucratic takeover, the federal policing, the economic pressure. What do you actually have? Well, the source uses a very specific political science term to diagnose this new reality. And that term is competitive authoritarianism. It's a bit of a mouthful, I know, but the idea is this. It's not a complete dictatorship where they've gotten rid of elections. It's a system where the basic institutions of democracy, like courts and elections, they still exist on paper, but the playing field has been tilted so heavily in favor of the people in power that it's almost impossible for them to actually live. The analysis argues that by 2026, the U.S. is showing the 4 classic signs of this kind of system. 1. The referees are captured. The DOJ and the civil service are filled with loyalists. 2. Opponents are criminalized. Political rivals find themselves targeted with endless investigations. 3. Violence is normalized. We see state violence against citizens, like what happened to Minneapolis, being defended and justified. And 4. Truth becomes fluid. Official government narratives begin to matter more than objective, verifiable facts. And there's a single sentence from the document that I think just perfectly summarizes this whole transformation. It says, the deep state of experts is replaced by a deep state of loyalists. It's a complete inversion of how the system was designed to work. And so, the analysis leaves us with this final, frankly chilling question. It does note that the antibodies of democracy, things like protests and lawsuits and grassroots organizing, are starting to kick in. But it asks whether the public will fully recognize the sound of these gears turning before it's too late to stop the machine.
Thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment with any topic you'd like us to talk about in future videos, and don't forget to hit the like button.